Good morning, church. My name is Baron Brock, and I'm going to be doing the morning devotionals with us today. We're going to be in Mark 10, starting in verse 1, if you want to go ahead and turn there with me. Previously in chapter 9, we see Jesus talking about his resurrection. The disciples argue who's the greatest. And then Jesus speaks on causing little ones to stumble, and then salt that has lost its saltiness. And then we jump into chapter 10. We kind of have a little bit of a shift in where we're going, kind of a new set of things to talk about. And I kind of want to open with this opening question to keep in the back of your mind. And that would be, where does a hard heart lead us? Where does a hard heart lead us? That's the question I want to have in the back of our mind as we jump into this. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Then he arose from there and came to the region of Judea by the other side of the Jordan, and multitudes gathered to him again, and as he was accustomed, he taught them again." So where is Jesus coming from? Where is he arising from? So chapter 9 tells us that he's actually in Capernaum, which is kind of on the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee. So he gets up from there and he comes down to Judea, but notice that it says on the other side of the Jordan. So this is not the side with Jerusalem on it. This is the east side, which would be right under the Decapolis. So not the side with Jerusalem. And then Jesus is obviously teaching these people. We see then in verse 2, the Pharisees came and asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Testing Jesus. And he answered and said to them, "What did Moses command you?" And they said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and to dismiss her." So the Pharisees are trying to trick Jesus. They ask him about divorce. This is kind of a highly debated topic in the day. If you look up some context, there's kind of two main schools of thought that are going on. There's two rabbinical teachers that one is kind of maybe more liberal and the other one's maybe more conservative. And so there's a lot of debate on what these two guys are saying. And the Pharisees in some sense are asking Jesus, hey, what's your perspective, right? And they're really hoping that in Jesus' response, they can catch him in something wrong that he says, as they kind of got him thinking on his feet. So Jesus says, well, what does Moses have to say, right? The one who gives us the law. And so they say, well, Moses actually does allow us to divorce. You know, you give a divorce certificate to your wife and then you go on your way. In verse 5, Jesus answered and said to them, "Because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female." So Jesus is going to go on to kind of defend this perspective, and he's quoting back from Genesis. And this is kind of a complex answer, but it's an extremely solid one. Jesus basically says, hey, people's hearts are hard, and namely the spouse that wants to leave the marriage. And generally in their day, that was probably the man. And because of that hard heart, the Lord wants to protect and defend the person who's on the receiving end of that hard heart. And thus he allows Moses to go through this process of divorce. So the person who is divorced is not hurt or left in a bad way in any way. Basically, if you didn't want to be with your wife anymore, you might still be married to her. And then you would just mistreat her and never interact with her, never provide for her, do anything for her. And so this certificate of divorce is kind of defending the person who's getting divorced. But Jesus explains that this is not God's original intention. And he kind of goes through that more in the next couple of verses. But basically, he points back to Genesis, which is before the law of Moses, as his justification. And he says, look, God's original plan was for people to stay married and be married for life. And the law of Moses only comes about because of your hard hearts that we had to then deal with how you guys are just not following my original command. And this kind of leads me to the answer of that original question, and that would be a hard heart leads us away from God's plan. Okay? A hard heart hurts others. It causes pain to those around us, especially we see in this marriage example. It causes a lot of hurt to the spouse that we're leaving. You can see this, though, even with kids. You think about kids can be hurt in these kind of relationships. And a hard heart in general can even hurt coworkers or friends around you if you're just simply not willing to follow God's will in whatever that situation may be. And in a big way, it makes us move farther away from God's will in our lives. As we begin to no longer obey His commands, we don't really experience His will for us either, because God had an original plan that He wanted us to do, that He lays out in His Word, right? A certain way that we're supposed to interact with others. And then as we deviate from that, we are no longer in line with what God wants to do in our life. And in a very real sense, we begin to no longer experience the blessings that He has for us. And we find a substitute for God's will. We begin to enjoy the exception instead of the original goal, if that makes any sense. And if we look back at this with marriage, we begin to, if we have a hard heart, we begin to be okay with divorce and a marriage that doesn't work anymore. We settle for that and we say, you know what, I am going to walk through divorce. When God's original plan is to have a joyful marriage that lasts a lifetime and you don't experience divorce, right? But at the root of that, at the root of settling for the exception, is a hard heart. And so I would challenge you guys to check yourselves today. Is your heart hard in any way? And is that leading you to no longer experience the original plan that God has for you? I pray that encouraged you guys. I know it's convicting and encouraging for me as well. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope applying this to your life really makes a difference.